What started as a simple act of kindness, hanging a bird feeder, spiraled into a full-blown suburban showdown. One neighbor, obsessed with control, invoked fake HOA rules, called the cops, and even planted evidence to get her way. But what she didn't expect was that her entire scheme would unravel and go viral. This is the outrageous true story of how one woman tried to turn birdwatching into a crime. It began with something simple, an ordinary wooden bird feeder, hung with care on a metal hook by the front porch of a suburban home. It wasn't extravagant or flashy, just a classic squirrel-resistant design with a small roof and clear plastic walls. Filled with a mix of sunflower seeds, millet, and cracked corn, it was intended to attract cardinals, finches, and sparrows, nothing more. Within days, it did exactly that. Birds began to gather in small flocks, darting from branches to feeder and back again, their colors flashing like little jewels. For many in the neighborhood, it became a small but welcome sight, a bit of life and motion amid manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. Some residents took notice with curiosity and appreciation. A few even followed suit, putting up their own feeders in quiet solidarity. For a while, it became a subtle trend along the block. Morning routines began to include a glance at the fluttering birds, and children paused to point out a bright red cardinal or a chubby mourning dove. It brought a calm, almost nostalgic charm to a neighborhood otherwise consumed with garbage schedules, HOA newsletters, and the endless hum of lawnmowers. But not everyone was pleased. Across the street, in a pristine beige house with matching shutters and a lawn trimmed to military precision, Karen watched the feeder with growing disdain. To her, it wasn't the source of beauty or a haven for wildlife. It was a disruption, a contamination of her controlled suburban environment. She believed the birds were bringing noise, feathers, and droppings. She insisted the feeder attracted raccoons, though none had been seen. She warned that squirrels might start digging up yards. And worst of all, she claimed, without any evidence, that rats could follow. She began her campaign with passive-aggressive gestures, long stares, loud comments to passing neighbors, and suspiciously timed lawn work whenever birds gathered near the feeder. Her disapproval was no secret. Soon, she escalated, claiming that bird feeders were against the Homeowners Association regulations. This was odd, because no one recalled seeing such a rule in any of the HOA paperwork, if there even was a formal HOA to begin with. The community was technically unincorporated, and the original development plans from years prior had dissolved into little more than a Facebook group and a twice-a-year block party. Still, Karen spoke with authority. She told neighbors that bird feeders caused property values to drop. She said they encouraged pests and violated community harmony guidelines. When asked to produce the specific rule, she said it was part of a verbal addendum from the early years of the neighborhood and that everyone who cared about the area's image knew about it. She began handing out printed notices, poorly formatted and filled with vague legal jargon, warning residents that their bird feeders were subject to removal and fines. The flyers were signed by the Homeowners Association Compliance Office, a department that didn't exist. She even included an address on the bottom, her own. People were skeptical, but also hesitant to get involved. Most homeowners had learned the hard way that Karen thrived on conflict and turned even the smallest disagreements into weeks-long crusades. A few quietly removed their feeders to avoid confrontation. Others simply ignored her and hoped she'd lose interest. But the original bird feeder remained. Karen's frustration turned to indignation. Her complaints became louder and more public. She claimed to see dangerous animals lurking around the feeder at night. She reported that her dog was nervous because of all the bird activity. She speculated that bird seed could become a fire hazard if left in the sun too long. She began taking photos from across the street, zoomed in on loose seeds, bird droppings, and supposed nests forming in gutters. None of it held up under scrutiny. She didn't stop there. She began pressuring other neighbors to sign a petition to ban feeders entirely, even offering to write the letters for them. Some signed just to get her off their porches. Others refused, sparking gossip wars on the neighborhood Facebook group. Karen responded to criticism with long, all-caps posts quoting fabricated ordinances and claiming that bird feeders violated natural ecosystem boundaries. Her obsession grew daily. She began walking the neighborhood with a clipboard, noting where feeders were located and how often they were refilled. She called them unsanctioned wildlife baiting devices and warned parents that birds carry disease. When challenged, she deflected with phrases like, "You don't understand the long-term environmental impact," or "You'll thank me when the vermin show up." The simple act of feeding birds had become a battleground. What started as a peaceful gesture to invite nature into a backyard had turned into a power struggle, fueled by control, paranoia, and imaginary rules. And for Karen, it was just the beginning. Following her failed efforts to shame the neighborhood into compliance, Karen launched a more aggressive and formal campaign. She began drafting letters on letterhead labeled Community Standards Enforcement Division, complete with a fabricated logo and vague references to housing regulations. These notices were delivered to select households with bird feeders and framed as official HOA correspondence. The tone was authoritative, bordering on legalistic, citing violations of wildlife management policy and invoking penalties ranging from written warnings to potential fines. The problem, however, was glaring. There was no active homeowners association. The neighborhood had once discussed forming one years earlier, but no charter was filed, no dues collected, and no board officially elected. Yet the letters continued, printed on crisp paper and signed by Karen M., HOA compliance chair. Some residents were caught off guard, unsure if perhaps an HOA had quietly formed without their knowledge. Others saw through it immediately but chose not to engage. Karen did not stop at warnings. She escalated the language in subsequent notices, threatening legal action and claiming that the continued presence of bird feeders would be reported to local authorities for code enforcement violations. She cited imaginary bylaws and reference sections of property codes that didn't exist. She even claimed to have photographic evidence of infractions, attaching low-resolution images of porches and backyards taken from public sidewalks or zoomed from across the street. While many residents dismissed the letters as bluffs, the tone shifted when Karen started posting them online in the community's social media group, publicly tagging individuals and alleging they were repeat offenders. She framed herself as a whistleblower protecting the integrity of the neighborhood. This public shaming campaign led to increased tension and whispered conversations at mailboxes and curbside trash pickups. The homeowner at the center of the initial bird feeder dispute recognized the growing hostility and began to document every interaction. Copies of letters were saved, photos were taken of Karen photographing houses, and timestamps were logged. Screenshots of social media posts were archived. It became clear that the situation was evolving beyond a neighborhood nuisance and into a case of impersonation, harassment, and potential fraud. While Karen believed she was asserting order, others began preparing for something more serious, exposing the truth. After her fabricated HOA campaign failed to gain traction, Karen escalated her tactics by involving law enforcement. Over the course of several weeks, she made multiple non-emergency police calls reporting a variety of alleged violations. She described the bird feeders as unauthorized structures, claimed they were attracting pests and potentially dangerous wildlife, and even filed a complaint asserting that the setup posed a public safety hazard. Each call was carefully worded to sound legitimate, using vague terminology that implied code violations or environmental concerns without offering concrete proof. Local authorities, required to respond regardless of the caller's credibility, began performing wellness checks and brief inspections. Officers arrived to find clean yards, safely installed feeders, and no evidence of wrongdoing. In each case, no citations were issued, but the repeated visits caused unease among the residents targeted. Some neighbors began to worry that continuous police involvement, even unfounded, could eventually lead to fines or legal entanglements. Karen used this fear to fuel her narrative that something needed to be done. The turning point came when birdseed was mysteriously discovered scattered across a homeowner's driveway and yard, far from where the feeder was located. The spread was excessive, forming obvious piles near doorways, garage entrances, and fence lines. The implication was clear. Someone was trying to make it appear that wildlife was being irresponsibly attracted to the property. Initially dismissed as an accident or prank, suspicion grew when the incident repeated days later, this time accompanied by torn trash bags and shredded seed packaging dumped near the mailbox. A nearby neighbor, tired of the ongoing chaos, quietly observed Karen early one morning dumping the seed herself. This prompted several residents to install discrete security cameras around their properties, aimed at driveways and yards. Within a week, the footage confirmed what many had suspected. Karen was recorded trespassing, scattering seed, and tampering with trash bins. The evidence was undeniable. It revealed not only her actions but the calculated nature of the sabotage. What had begun as a complaint over a bird feeder had transformed into deliberate acts of property tampering and false reporting. The community, once hesitant to intervene, now had proof. The focus shifted from neighborhood disputes to questions of legal accountability. With undeniable video evidence in hand, residents wasted no time taking action. The footage clearly showed Karen trespassing, planting birdseed, and manipulating trash to fabricate nuisance conditions. A compilation of clips, along with background context about the fabricated HOA letters and false police reports, was edited and anonymously posted on a popular neighborhood watch forum and local social media groups. The video quickly gained traction. Within hours, shares and comments multiplied. Viewers were stunned, not only by the pettiness of the dispute, but by the deliberate lengths Karen had gone to create a false narrative. The virality of the footage reached beyond the neighborhood. Online communities specializing in HOA drama and suburban conflicts picked it up, turning the situation into a symbol of extreme overreach and suburban authoritarianism. Local media caught wind, and inquiries were made to verify the story. As public attention intensified, real authorities became involved. The local police department, now presented with actual evidence, opened an investigation into the misuse of emergency services, filing of false reports, and acts of harassment. Karen's history of behavior became a subject of scrutiny. Complaints from other neighbors, previously undocumented or dismissed, resurfaced. Residents began to speak openly about past encounters, revealing a pattern of intimidation, impersonation, and manipulation. Her fabricated role as HOA compliance chair was formally exposed, and she was issued a cease and desist order related to fraudulent documentation and impersonation of an authority figure. Legal counsel reviewed her actions, and misdemeanor charges related to harassment and false reporting were filed. The consequences were swift. Karen's standing in the community collapsed. She was removed from local neighborhood forums, and her property became the subject of actual code inspections, this time unrelated to feeders. Multiple neighbors filed restraining orders or civil complaints, and her presence in the community became increasingly untenable. The original bird feeder remained untouched, still hanging quietly as birds fluttered in and out. What began as a peaceful attempt to enjoy nature had spiraled into a public spectacle, but the resolution was clear. The false authority was dismantled, the community reclaimed its voice, and Karen's campaign of control collapsed under the weight of her own fabrications. The neighborhood, once divided, found unexpected unity through exposure and truth. Backhand index pointing right for more wild neighborhood drama like this. Subscribe to Expect Stories, where the truth is always stranger than fiction.